And we'll call the meeting to order at 6:05. I might have done that already, but I'm going to do it again. Oh, there we go. Okay, so, and Liz is our minute taker. So before we get started, just check in and see if anybody has any public comment. Hey, Sandy, how are you? Happy New Year.
Hey, Krista, Happy New Year to you too. Just finished making dinner. So I was a little late. Sorry,
Feel
guys.
free to eat if you need to. The beauty of Zoom meetings.
Oh, I know.
Okay, well, I don't see anybody with an interest in making a comment right now, but for those that are with us, we're pretty, we have our public comment meeting or times at the beginning and the end of our agenda, but at different points, I'm happy to pause since we're a small group and see if anybody who isn't a regular member of the committee has anything to comment on. Also just want to clarify that we are, I think this has come up before. So this is a committee of the board and our focus is on making sure we have opportunities to get input from our community members and to also make sure we're regularly sharing information out to them. So this isn't an actual community engagement event, rather it's a place where we plan those things. So just want to make sure folks are clear on that. Okay, so I just need to start by getting someone to please make a motion to approve the minutes from our early December meeting, which feels like an eternity ago.
I so move. This is
Thank you,
Sandy.
Sandy.
I can second. Rob will second.
Great, thank you. All those in favor of approving the minutes from December, please say aye or just raise your hand or put your thumb up. Great.
Aye.
Okay, and the minutes are approved. Thank you. All right, so you know, for most, there hasn't been a ton happening. Our last actual board meeting was December 20th, and since that time, things have been obviously pretty quiet. This, I think, is one of the first meetings of the new year. So I thought it would make sense to spend our time tonight thinking about the community budget forum, which we have scheduled for the 12th, and talk a little bit about what we envision for a format and an agenda and how we want to make sure to get the word out about that. But before we dive into that, is there anything else? I kind of put a place for other business and updates. And so if there's anything folks want to add to that part of the agenda or anything else we should consider, just open it up for suggestions.
I guess, I don't know if it's appropriate, but I have, I was at the merger study committee meeting last night.
Yep.
By Zoom, and I could give a brief update
Okay.
about what happened.
Okay.
If that's appropriate. If it's not, I don't need to do that.
Nope, that's fine. I was not at that meeting, so I'm not able, and I know they come out with minutes and a brief after, but that hasn't come out yet, so I wouldn't be able to share, so that's great. Maybe we'll do that and any other updates after the budget piece. Anybody have anything else that they want to make sure we talk about? Okay, so let's see. Oh, it keeps telling me I can't minimize my screen and I want to. All right, so to refresh everybody's memory, we had decided to do both the thought exchange to get input from the community on priorities going into the next school year, and then also hold a budget meeting or forum as two different ways to connect with the community around the budget development process. And because we've been pretty preoccupied by lots of different things, our timing is a little bit late, but we felt like we wanted, in terms of where we are in the budget building process, but we wanted to still be sure to give our community those opportunities. And so at the December 20th board meeting, we shared with the board and then shared out with this group and then posted on Front Porch Forum the results and the themes from the thought exchange. And we heard a presentation from Patrick on where we're at with the budget. We had the opportunity to ask lots of questions. And this meeting on the 12th comes between that conversation that we last had as a board and the meeting on January 25th, where we need to vote to warn a budget amount to be voted on at town meeting. So we have a deadline by which we need to do that. And that meeting is our last chance to do that. So this forum is really more of a, in my mind, more of an information sharing and an opportunity for people to ask questions and get clarification. So thinking about that, and that we're going to do this virtually for the obvious reasons, I wanted to get a sense from folks on what they think would be a good format. And so I'll throw out an idea based on what we did. We've done it twice now, once before we reopened after the school shutdown. We did at least one, maybe two COVID kind of town hall meetings for families. And then we also had several virtual town halls after Patrick made his presentation to the board of his proposal for school reconfiguration. And in both of those, we had a webinar style event where there was a presentation and then people were invited to submit questions through the chat, but that chat went just to several facilitators. It wasn't like a live chat, which happens during the meeting. And then folks, there were a team of people who took those questions as they came in, tried to kind of theme them together, and then shared them back out with a facilitator who asked the questions to the panel of people that were going to be answering them. So that helps to kind of allow the presenter to get through the presentation and to not have the distraction for the audience of lots of chat comments coming in during the meeting, but it makes sure that people have a chance to ask all their questions in a pretty efficient way. So that's one way that we could do this. And if we did that, I imagined that there'd be several people that would be able to answer the questions and that Patrick would provide that presentation. So just thinking about that as something to kind of react to, I'd love to just have kind of an open conversation of what people think would be most effective, if that's an idea that would work, other thoughts or reactions that you have to what you think would be most useful for folks.
Go ahead, Kim.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure what I'm going to say because I'm not sure how I feel about it. Other than it seems that to have it sort of wide open, just people firing questions at the facilitators around the budget. It feels unruly to me, only in that. And I guess with good facilitation, you could group questions and, we wouldn't have to answer the same thing over and over. But would there be an opportunity for people to preview the major changes or the big things about the budget that Patrick might want to highlight prior to the forum so that they could come with questions that are really specific to what's on the table? Because it feels like that would be more productive for everybody and people, their questions would be more thoughtful, and not that everybody will do it, but if they had a chance to say, okay, these are the major things, and these are the questions that would pertain, the best to this conversation. Because, as you know, you get things from just total left field, and you want to accommodate as many people as you can, and not for people not to feel like they haven't been heard. So helping to just frame up the questions by giving people a chance to preview some of the big issues, I think would work well.
And before I let folks respond to that, I just want to clarify a little bit about the format piece that might help a little. So the way we did this before, we had a presenter, but then we had somebody else other than the presenter who was monitoring the chat that only came to them or to them and somebody else. So the presenter could sort of keep presenting. Those folks took the questions, there was a Google Doc that they created live and kind of threw the questions up there and grouped them. And then there was a different person who then would ask from those group of questions, would ask the presenter. So they all got answered, or most of them got answered, I think, but they were themed so that they weren't repetitive.
Right.
But anyway, I just wanted to clarify that part, but I think you make an interesting point about providing info in advance, but I want to stop talking now because I'm talking too much. Go ahead, Nancy.
I was worrying about calling it a forum because I had doubts about whether there was time for community input to really change the board's or the superintendent's thinking about the budget at this point. So I think it's very wise, as you say, that it's really more of an informational meeting and an opportunity to ask questions, and billing it that way will be really important. I think that I see that the board has a meeting the night before the 12th, and I hope that the board will be asking more questions about the budget, delving into the budget in more detail. And I imagine that it's also going to still be possible for the board to lay on another meeting before the 25th if need be. I mean, that's certainly what we have heard in the past. So anyway, maybe there's time between the 12th and the 25th for more deliberation if it's needed. But that being said, I think we could anticipate some particular things that people will want to know about the budget, some particular kinds of questions that people will have. We won't be able to anticipate all of them, but it would be good to be able to anticipate some of them and be ready to answer those questions. And I'm thinking, and I hope we can spend some time tonight doing that. I mean, certainly people are going to want to look at what the budget, the proposed budget, which is in draft form, means in terms of individual schools, that is staffing, class sizes, grade configurations within a school. I mean, parents will just want to know that, and it would have to be presented with caveats because that's not all set in stone, but to give people a sense of what it's going to look like for their kids. I mean, we know people want to know that, and I think people will also want to know for sure the effects of the change in tax rate in dollars by typical assessments, the way we have done in the past. And again, it can't be set in stone because there's so much still up in the air, but we know they'll want to know that. So things along those lines, if we can anticipate some of those questions, I know that people are wondering about would like much more detail than the board has gotten about principals' involvement in building the budget and in making decisions about the budget. The superintendent has answered that in very general terms about previous commitments to the strategic plan and so forth, but people are really wondering about principals' voices. So and those are sort of the three big areas I can think of off the top of my head. I'm sure others will think of other things that we'll want to be sure to have presented that night. But I also really, I think that the idea of a presenter, a chat monitor, a collector on a Google Doc, it does put whoever's presenting, which is probably the superintendent, kind of on the spot, because you can't always anticipate everything that people are going to wonder about. But Patrick's pretty good at thinking on his feet, so.
I have a question. Given
Go
how
ahead.
late the whole this is in the budgeting process, what is the mechanism for incorporating people's comments in a meaningful manner? In other words, is this supposed to be influencing the budget, or is this purely an informational meeting that is telling people what the board's reasoning is?
I guess, I mean, I just want to say, I have my doubts about whether people's opinions are going to influence what happens around this budget. Partly because of the timing, and partly because it will be easy to say, and true to say, that whoever shows up on the 12th is not necessarily a representative sample of our communities.
In that case, I would hesitate to label it a forum, because I think
Yeah.
a forum implies that there's going to be feedback. And I think that that would tend to undermine people's trust in
Yeah.
the board, because if they feel like people are they're asking for feedback and then they aren't incorporating it, that would actually be very detrimental. I think it would be much better to just say this is an informational meeting, if that's what it is.
Liz, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think the thought exchange was a really exciting way, and that I do feel that that was incorporated, that feedback there, into the budget building process. And that, yeah, this is great to have it. I mean, I think an opportunity to get information and ask questions in and of itself is also important. So that's great. And I think, maybe when we send out the invitation, if we have a link to the presentation on it at that point, possibly whatever we were going to look at, then people could have time to kind of look through and pick out the parts that are most interesting to them, and kind of maybe that would be possible or helpful.
Go ahead, Rob.
Can I just say, just real quick in response, Liz, if it's true that the thought exchange was an integral part of building the budget, then let's have someone talk about how what was heard through thought exchange is reflected in the budget.
Yeah, I think that what I'd like to do is get a sense. Well, first, if we've agreed, and I'm not sure we've all agreed yet, but if we all agree that that this is really an information session to give people a chance to hear more about what the budget's going to look like and get questions answered. And if this webinar type format where there's a little more facilitated opportunity to ask questions makes sense, then I think it would be great for this group to talk about what would be most helpful to share with people, both in advance and at the meeting. And I know that Patrick is planning on drawing upon some of the feedback from the thought exchange and making connections where there are to what's in the budget. But I think there's some other ideas that have been shared that are really important to make sure that are included as well. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, couple thoughts. I think going back to Kim's point, we do have a couple things we could present to folks prior in the invitation. One being the budget presentation. I know some of those numbers will probably look different even the night prior to the the event, but there's a presentation that's already public via minutes. There are questions that the board asked of Patrick. I think those should be shared out too. I think those are really important. And then also the thought exchange. I think those are three things that I think would be really nice to share out for folks to look at and chew on prior to the event. And then I was thinking, a follow-up piece, because I agree. I mean, we did the thought exchange pretty 11th hour, and I think it was great that we did it. But could we even have, I guess, two pieces? Could we have a thought exchange at the end that opens up after the budget presentation in regards to, okay, thinking about next year's budget, what should the superintendent and the board and the district be thinking about for next year's budget? I know it's like ways off, but that's when it's going to be fresh. I think, at least on some people's minds that might really want to have an opinion, and then also an informed opinion. I think we saw that in the thought exchange, where I think some folks didn't even know where to start in regards to that big, broad question of, how could my thoughts or ideas influence a $30 million budget? Just a thought I had in regards to that. And then also, in regards, I like the idea of people being able to ask questions. I think it would be wise, and I think it would be wise if those questions could be anonymous somehow. If they're filtered through not someone that's either on the board or that works for the school district. I've just, I've heard in my time on the board, folks not really wanting to maybe even ask questions or share comments, just in the fear of uncomfortable situations. I'll just put it at that. So if those could be either, I think it'd be hard to have them shared anonymously from the person to the person receiving the question, but then somehow, I don't know, that's just a thought I've had. But I also agree. I mean, I don't know if it's quite a forum piece, but I mean, I think the budget presentation from the meeting in December it's really, it's a good start for Patrick, and same with those questions. And I wondered, there were questions from the thought exchange also, right, that were raised? Am I right in saying that? They're just broad questions. Would you try to see if we can answer some of those?
Yes, I think you're right, Rob. I think I remember when we were looking at it with the account manager, she was showing us how you could go in and see like if there were actually questions that you could go in and answer those. So that might be something that we could look at to pull up FAQs in advance, that we think people want answered. And similarly, we could probably identify some key areas that people are going to be most interested in. I think we started to do a little bit of that now.
I guess there isn't a way, or is there, to solicit people's questions ahead of time, to give the superintendent and the rest of the board more time to prepare. More advanced notice about what to prepare for.
My only concern would be, like, I think we could probably put that out to folks with an invitation. My only concern is if we aren't able to answer all the questions in advance. Like, if it's to get a gauge of what types of questions we should try to have Patrick touch upon, I think we could do that. But I'm worried if we try to have everything answered beforehand, that there won't be enough time.
Yeah.
I just don't want folks to get mad that they've asked a question. Yeah, I don't know. What do other people think about that?
I think that people being able to ask a question because if they can't be at the meeting,
Mhm.
at least gives them a chance to submit some input.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking about the thought exchange and Rob's idea about running it at the end of this meeting for next meeting, with the goal of introducing thought exchange for people that maybe didn't participate in the last one. And so I just want to make sure when it gets introduced, that it gets introduced as a tool that the board is going to be using. And it proved to be fairly informative when we did it, even though it was done sort of at the end, very quickly. That was only open for a week, and the timing was off, but that for the future, this is a way that the community can provide input to the board, to do it anonymously, and then they get used to the idea that this is a way that they can have some influence on how decisions are made. So using it frequently is a good idea. I don't think we should save it. And I don't know what the cost is. I don't know if you pay every time or if you have a
No.
license so you can use it as many times as you want.
Yep.
But it seems like it might even just be a good exercise for people to get used to this. Okay, here's how I'm going to engage with the school board and
Mhm.
look forward to a thought exchange around some of the big issues so that
Mhm.
people can share their ideas.
That's such a great idea. I
Mhm.
mean, one of the things it makes me think about, and whether we'd want to do this on the 12th or after the 12th or not, the superintendent is under legal obligation to collect public input on the use of the ARPA funds that the school district has received. And I know some of those funds have been spent, but I don't think he's had time yet to collect that public input on the balance of the funds. And the total amount that came in was over $4 million. And I'm just wondering whether, the thought exchange might be a great way to collect that input in a pretty efficient way, either related to what we do on the 12th or after the 12th, shortly after the 12th.
Mhm.
But another use of the thought exchange, I think, and by the way, I think the use of ARPA funds is something on many people's minds that it'll be important to be ready to answer questions about that. Another use of the thought exchange, there's going to be another informational meeting before people vote on this budget. And using the thought exchange to collect people's questions right after the event on the 12th would perhaps help people prepare for the informational meeting, which is probably going to be virtual also, that will happen right before town meeting day.
Yeah, Krista, question, like,
Yeah.
if you open an exchange, you have to set the sort of a time window, right? It sunsets. But then I assume in the world of the cloud, that is out there in the cloud
Mhm.
for probably good, right? So could you open one up, it sunsets, and then reopen it up later and that data is still there? I remember talking with them and they said, you could almost make it an FAQ where if there's a question embedded in the exchange, that someone could go in and answer the question. And then that person could go back and actually see the answer to that
Oh,
question.
right.
I'm
Yeah,
just
and
thinking of it as a tool that the district might be able to use, sort of, instead of having a Google Doc over here and then there's a document over there. Could it be a hub, like a budget hub, so that we open it up on the 12th, let's say, we re-show it or reopen it up on the information meeting before the vote, and then as we move into next fall, we reopen it up again. There's already that data and information there, because they're probably going to be similar questions for budget cycle year over year per se, aside from maybe some nuances depending on facilities plannings and stuff like that. But just I don't know if that's possible.
But now
Yeah.
that I look at the calendar and see that it's about a week away, 12 seems so far, but it's actually so close. We've really got to make some decisions clearly tonight and not get too fancy, although I like I mean, because we're still learning about thought exchange, so we don't really have time to do all that setup before a week from now. We'll be lucky to have enough of a concept so that we can invite people far enough ahead to get people to come.
I am wondering though, if it would be a good idea to invite Kristen and Avneet to join this group for our next meeting, because they are really probably a lot better able to, I think I sort of got the idea of what you're talking about, Rob, which is like a different kind of thought exchange that's like a Q&A, and it builds upon it, or an FAQ, and it builds upon itself. But anyway, setting the thought exchange piece aside, but not to bed. Like, let's see if we can't get them to come to one of our meetings so that you all can hear and we can brainstorm, because it is an investment that we want to definitely utilize. And I think it's going to be more valuable the more we use it. I think there's like a risk of burnout, like with any surveying, you don't want to overuse it, but it's just a moment of time in time right now. But if we have 6 moments in time, we can get even more of a sense of what's on folks' minds, and they'll get used to it. So,
and I do think the idea of combining it with an in-person or Zoom event is a great idea. And I bet, I immediately thought, I made me wonder about whether Sue McCormick has used it.
Yeah, I don't know. But I think in CVU's district, since they did theirs in October, I think their thought exchange was much more leading into than a conversation at a forum.
Yeah.
In later October, which they could do because they had that time. So we're a little, we're operating in a different way with it right now, but that potential is there. Joan, go ahead.
I do agree that if it's not going to influence the budget, then I think an informational is better than calling it a forum. And my only concern with putting out a thought exchange or some sort of survey asking for information that you want to use towards next year's budget, I think that will be confusing to people. They'll think like, I'm answering this now, I haven't yet voted on the budget. This must be for this year. And so I almost wonder if asking for items to influence next year shouldn't wait until after this year's budget is done. Because you all know, you're familiar with the timing and when you start creating it, but people think of it in terms of this is the budget. This is what, if I give some feedback, I'd like to see it in there and be considered. I think that if you ask questions and then nothing comes from your questions, people get frustrated. Does that see where I'm heading with that?
Yep.
And people will only participate in those a certain number of times before they burn out on it, unless they feel like it's really being considered and taken into account.
Joan, your sound is cutting in and out, at least for me, and it may mean you might have to turn off your video so that.
You know what? I think I have to get. Oh shoot! There we go.
Okay.
There is a sort of a timing they recommend around different types of questions with the thought exchange. So again, I think if we have an opportunity for this group to talk to them and learn more about what they recommend, and then we could decide if we want to do that or do something different. But I think to your point, Joan, it's
Can you hear me better now? I think
yes.
I have to this computer, not the one I look at, but the other one closer. But yeah, and I mean, I think that the 2 women that did the presentation about the thought exchange know a lot about the program, but I'm not 100% convinced they know a lot about. I think you all know a lot more about the community and who you're talking to than they do. that I don't know where they're based, but they're looking at it in a much different light than you, knowing our community, would look at.
Sandy, putting you on the spot, but I just haven't heard much from you yet. Do you want to add anything or feel free to pass?
One of the things I was trying, having not been in the groove of this and the budget process for several years, how I imagine this is still happening. When Pam Marsh used to moderate,
Mhm.
that's
That's our
supposed to be-
annual
that's-
meeting.
Right. So the annual meeting is before usually the budget vote at town
Yeah.
meeting day. So that's still happening
Mhm,
in end of February-ish. Is that when it
Mhm.
happened?
mhm. Yep.
Okay. So
It's
this
like a
is all
day
in
or two
advance.
before, I believe.
Right. So before we actually, again, so when I think of the forum, it still is sort of some input, even though it's tight, because the board still hasn't decided on the budget, right? And then provided it to that ultimate meeting that happens before we then present the budget, right?
Well, right,
the
except
community.
we have to warn it by the end of January.
Mm.
Even though that meeting with Pam Marsh isn't until the end of February, it
Mm.
has to be submitted for warning. John knows probably the exact timing, but it's like 30 days or so, or, so that's why we have to, I think sometimes the numbers change a little bit from what's on the ballot to what actually is because of things that are out of our control, but
But once it's on the ballot, it's what gets voted on, and
Correct.
what goes on the ballot is what the board warns at the end of January.
yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the reason I'm sort of quiet is because it's funny, like I'm like relearning everything that happens as part of this budget process. And I do feel always, maybe it'll always feel this way, but I always feel one step behind, in sort of understanding in the formation of the budget. So for me, I'm listening mostly because a lot of what we're doing, and I think the intensity of our work, including the thought exchange, all these things I think will also help us honestly next budget year.
Yeah.
So part of me is trying to take it in to think about,
Mhm.
like I don't really have an opinion on what I think the best way of doing the forum is.
Mhm.
Next week, I'm kind of open to actually, I think all the possibilities. So that's why I'm very neutral today.
Mhm.
Not
You
usually
always
neutral,
ask
but I
really
am
good
today.
questions though, Sandy. You really do. So I think your relearning position is helpful to everybody else on the board because your questions are always really helpful. And helpful to
Thanks,
this
Nancy.
group too.
Thanks, Nancy. Which reminds me to both Rob and Krista, and which I'm sure Dawn already knew, is that I think today was our sort of day we're supposed to get questions to Dawn. Am I right about that, Krista? If we had any more budget questions for our next meeting? I had it listed I actually just looked at the minutes. Dawn had said if there were questions to try to get those in by today, the 4th.
Ron's giving that a thumbs up, I see.
Oh, is she? Okay, I
Yeah.
only see part of the grid. And so, and this is where Nancy, I think you're very helpful too, being a little more intimate with building budgets and sort of what actually is involved in that process. I feel at a little disadvantage because I don't sometimes know what to ask ahead of time until it's all presented to me and then it hits me, as opposed to having gone through the process over and over and I can see it building on a bigger, broader sort of development.
I
But if
do
you have any-
really worry that that policy governance leads board members to believe that they shouldn't ask as many questions about the budget. And I think that
Mhm.
that's really a misconception and a dangerous one as well.
It makes me lean towards some more board work, which is separate from us, but might be helpful also eventually. Who knows, might help us be a little sharper on figuring out how to communicate to the community. I know the board is exploring trying to decide should we or shouldn't we have a finance committee who really, really gets like a better understanding of the building of the budget and commits themselves to that extra work, which is a lot of extra work, I think, to get that deeper understanding. And I imagine that that would only better inform us on where to focus, like the things that we really need to be connecting to the community. I think that could help. Because I
think
often
so.
feel very disconnected with the numbers and then how it bridges to like what we're doing.
I think so too. And I think since consolidation, community members have found the budget to be way less transparent than it used to be. And when it was presented by school. And that isn't, when consolidation was advocated for, it was more transparency was promised, and that hasn't happened. And maybe a finance committee would really help the board do that.
I can see that.
I would just say that I don't know that it's policy governance that is is implicated. I think, like this committee does a lot of heavy lifting around a really important part of the entire board's work, which is engaging with the community. And so it enables the board to be much more effective at at connecting with the community, because we have this smaller group of folks really focusing on that. And perhaps that's what we need for the finance committee, is not that it's the idea of being a policy governance board, but it's the idea that it's really difficult for all members of the board to be equally versed in so many different, and spending a lot of time and energy on any one thing. And so, I think for some board members, they are much more comfortable with budget building, and some board members are much more comfortable with connecting with the community and what that should look like. And, so I think that's work we still need to do. And I think we'll get there. I just I hope we can be more proactive, but we need to figure out how to do that well. Figure out our processes so we can be more proactive and not reactive. Like building the budget, for example, starting to solicit input from the community in September. Like, hey, what are folks, maybe not right after we warn this budget, but definitely way before we have to warn the next one. So yeah, I think we'll get there. And I think we've got some great suggestions from Nate on how to make our budget more accessible to folks so that it is more transparent. And I think it's incredibly detailed and informative, but in that detail, maybe some transparency has been lost to no one's fault. It's just a desire to, make sure everything's in there, but it makes it hard to really piece out. So I'm hopeful that we'll get that out of the work from Nate as kind of a byproduct to the other work he's doing. But these are good things for us to really be thinking about. Rob, you unmuted. Did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I don't know if this is, I think it's sort of relevant to Nancy's point, but I also don't have any prior history to budget building process before this district was merged.
Mhm.
To see transparency, I think just it's flawed in the process of a $32 million budget for one organization versus 5 different budgets for local elementary schools and then a budget for a high school. So just in the setup alone, I think overwhelms people like myself. $32 million, I can't even fathom that number, but I think it's much more tangible if I say, all right, so looking at Robinson Elementary, here's the budget, and you can make those connections to, oh, that's that many staff members. I think that just, again, I don't know if this is true. I see people shaking their heads, but That's where I struggle, is making those connections, even with, on the budget with class sizes in different schools or enrollment in different schools. It's still hard for me to understand sort of maybe how that shakes out, especially when we think about equity across the district. So I think it's an uphill challenge. Floyd seems incredible. I mean, he is willing to try to dig up most answers to most questions if he can. And I think, we shouldn't overwhelm him, but also I think he's willing to take that challenge on as best as he can. And I appreciate him for doing that. So I agree with you, Krista, that we're trying to be better, and that's all we can, right? More perfect, if you will. So, yeah.
More good, better good. There were a couple things that I wanted to go back to that I think we talked a little bit about, just to kind of get back to the NOT forum, the information meeting about the budget with questions and answers. And one thing that was mentioned early on, I think by Kim, was, what should we share in advance? Oh, I think actually, Rob, I like what you pointed out with what I think you listed, which was resharing the thought as we tell people about this event, resharing the thought exchange data, the budget presentation from the meeting that the board had on the 20th, and the board questions that that Patrick answered as well. That's a lot. So some folks will probably not read any of it. Some folks might read some folks might read all of it, but it does give people a place to, to think about where their questions are, or what their questions are. Does that?
It'll
Does
be
that make-
interesting to think about how much of the presentation that the board saw the other night at its last meeting should be provided.
Mhm.
That is, are there pieces of it that are more necessary than others? Are
Yep.
there pieces of it that speak more to the questions we anticipate that people will have? And are there pieces of it that should be switched out in favor of different ways of getting at the subject matter? I mean, I think, for example, the tax rate example is one way of thinking about that.
Yeah, I'm kind of wishing that I had shared that presentation with everyone here. But I'm wondering if I send that back out after the meeting to this group and to the board to say, hey, this is what we heard from Patrick on the 20th. When we think about sharing this with the community, what are the, oh, thanks, Rob. What do you think the most important takeaways are? Because I think that would be helpful feedback to give Patrick as he's preparing. And I know, we asked him, and I think he's planning on making sure to weave in again, how making the connection between some of the themes brought up in the thought exchange, what's important to our community and where that is reflected. So that, I think, is already planned to be part of that. But that feedback, I think, would be really helpful for folks to provide. And then something else that I wanted to go back to was, someone had asked, can people ask questions in advance? And then, I was thinking about, or I was reminded of the importance of always asking, how do we involve people who aren't going to participate in an event like this? So I do think that is an important thing for us to think about. How can people learn more if they have questions and aren't able to be at this event? So while I'm not sure if we ask folks in advance to submit questions that they would all be able to be answered at the forum, I do think we could probably find a way to do some sort of, touch on the ones that can get answered and have that ongoing FAQ to capture as many of those as we can after the fact. And again, I think that's what we did with the COVID stuff. And I think it worked well. And I don't believe it was too overwhelming. And most people's questions were kind of along similar lines. So,
What do
So
you
if that-
think are the chances that Patrick would be willing to provide more school level information than he gave at the December 20th budget presentation?
I don't know. I have no idea. I just was looking back at it to see, because there isn't much in there.
Another slide that for me personally, I think would be interesting is because those numbers, and some of them are so important when it comes down to the meat and potatoes of basically tax rate. Where the district was at last year with their assumptions, and then what actually was the real number at the end of the day. Because Floyd's doing his best. We're working with the information we have, but even after we had our meeting last year and people voted on the budget, the state said we had more equalized pupils than we actually did. And I mean, it really influenced tax rates. And so I just think that's always, for me, interesting to see, like, we're trying our best and there's assumptions and they might stay the same, but history has probably shown us that some of them might change. I don't know if that's relevant, but I was just looking at the presentation again, and yeah, it's unfortunate how fluid it is in the state of Vermont, where the state does not set school districts up for success regarding some of those big levers, like in regards to the yield and that final equalized pupil count, and just almost just throwing people under the bus. I hate to say that, but they don't help us.
But I mean, I think people understand that the board and the superintendent aren't in full control of all the numbers, and that the numbers are going to shift, especially if you say that, but and keep saying it because it's true. But to use that as a reason, people need to know that even though the numbers are going to shift, when you try to decide on a number for the budget, it's based on some educated guesses about what that's going to look like in every school, and that the educated guesses are specific to each school and take into account the needs of each school. I mean, people need to see that to feel comfortable about the budget.
So I was just looking, because I thought I'd recalled that we heard, because that was one of my questions that I had asked prior to our meeting on the 20th, about staffing and student need. And it isn't in Patrick's presentation. It's in a link to a document that he also shared with us at the board meeting, which was his response to board questions. And so I will share that out as well after this meeting, because it does actually show you the staff, the licensed staff and the support staff at each school, along with the and I think this is really important. It gets to a lot of what folks are thinking about and wanting to know more about, and then it gets at, let's see, enrollment, and then free and reduced lunch percentages, and then students on IEPs, 504s, or intensive plans. And so that's definitely information that has been shared with us by school, and that we can share back out with folks.
That'll be good to see.
Yeah, so So we were thinking 7 o'clock start, 7 to 8:30. And trying to have the presentation be meaty enough, but not so long that it doesn't allow for people to ask all the questions that they want to ask. What do people think about that time frame, and anything else about the format itself?
So are you thinking, so are you thinking about that format specifically, Krista, that there's a presentation,
Mhm.
then and during the presentation, people are asking questions in the chat? Is that what you're thinking?
Well, you can ask questions at any time, but it's not going to go to everybody. It's going to go, so they won't be flashing up on the screen
Right.
for all attendees to see. But they'll be answered at the end of the presentation.
And will everybody see everybody's questions?
No. Not during the meeting. I mean, we could do that. The way this worked last time was that they were kind of themed. So if there were like 5 questions that were very similar, that sort of theme of a question was given to the person who then asked it of the presenter. Does that make sense? Pretty sure how it worked.
Where
I
was
remember
Was-
because we were like in a situation room. So I was like, because I remember that I did the question asking at one of the COVID meetings. And I remember I was looking at a screen of, it was a Google Doc, and it was like getting populated with a question, and I would, ask the question as it came up. But I think it came from the chat. And there was two people that went through those and then just like put them into different categories.
I don't remember this, but hearing you talk about it makes me just convinced again that you are so brave.
Because I was in the situation room. I had my astronaut suit on.
Yeah, I bet you did.
Well, what I was hoping was that some folks here might volunteer to help with this sort of behind the scenes of either, asking the questions as they're given to you, or helping to kind of go through them and figure out how to theme them. So I know it sounds confusing, but it's not as confusing as it sounds. But I think it would be helpful to have a couple different people do that. I know that Patrick was going to ask Shannon Warden if she would help. She did this she's great with Zoom technology.
Yeah.
So she was hugely helpful last time, and I think he's hoping she would do that as well. And then I was hoping a couple of board members and folks from this group would also help with facilitating the event. And so we'd probably be in person together in a small group somewhere, but the audience will all be virtual.
I volunteered to help last time, so to the extent that I can help, I'll be there.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Thank you. Okay, so that's our format. And then anyone else who wants to be brave, just let me know. We'll get you a special suit to wear. And I think we know what we want to send out in advance. And then we can invite people who can't participate to submit questions they have. John, should that go to you? Should we? I wish we had a general board inbox.
They can send them to
these-
me and
Send-
just put budget information questions or something in the,
Okay.
specify it so that it doesn't get lost
Okay,
in my thousands of emails.
okay. Okay, and And then we'll get the word out in the ways that we usually do, which is Front Porch Forum on the website and a blast to all MAUSD families. Probably go out on the district Facebook page, but I would encourage this group to invite at least a handful of community members to attend.
We'll, yeah,
I was just gonna ask, when that goes out, could we have a brief introduction with the timeline so people sort of know where in the budget process the board is? And
You
I
mean
think
as part of the marketing for the event, like what this?
Yeah, what this
Mhm.
actually is, because I
Mhm.
think this is really confusing to a lot of people,
Mhm.
and just that this is an informational meeting. Here's what's happened. Here's what's going to happen, and here's your role, in it.
and here's your role going forward, letting people know that they'll be voting on this budget in a town meeting day, and
Right.
not this budget, but the budget that they'll be on the final version of this budget.
Will that final version be public prior to the meeting, the annual meeting?
Yeah,
Because it's been warned, right? It will then not
Be on
be
the website?
changed at all.
Like, when we
Um,
adopt it, it won't be changed. Once we
Right.
adopt it at that meeting, that's the one we go with.
right, but part of the question too is about in what form does the public and the board see the budget? I mean, the board has not seen the budget. They've seen a summary of the budget, but they haven't seen the whole budget, and I hope they will ask to see it sometime before they warn it, even though it's big and it's many pages and it's complex because it's all clumped together. That isn't how it has to be, but that is the way our district has been presenting it since consolidation. So, I mean, it used to be that the budgets would appear in each town report in their entirety, the whole school budget, and then the Mount A budget had a book of its own. But that isn't how it works anymore.
No, it does go in the town report, right, John? It just, it's all together. It's not by school, it's all together.
The whole budget?
What goes in is a condensed version, but then there are links to the entire budget that are available.
Well, I mean, do we have a town report that is electronic in every town that will take links? I don't know.
Most of the towns do it, and then they circulated it last year through their usual, on the website, you could see it. I don't know if we did Front Porch Forum as much last year with the budget thing, but I know you could see detail on the website.
And Dawn, do you think the board will be seeing the budget in detail before it votes the warning?
I'm not sure about that. I know last time we saw an in-between version, not the 20 pages, but that there was an ability to look at that if you wanted to. But mostly what we looked at was not the condensed, but a few steps in.
And I think if I recall, we had those columns. It was like coded, Floyd coded it so we could
Yes,
understand the different categories that each, not line, but each section related to.
right. And footnotes to explain things. We saw those. So
Yeah,
we
Because we had
did see
asked for that a couple of years after consolidation, so it would be easier for us to find things. And then I know Floyd worked to make that happen for at least last year, but I think the year before that as well. But we wouldn't be able to, we wouldn't have that to share next week. Like for the community, the info session, we'll have that on the annual meeting.
So if we're good, obviously we can't use the paper just because of the timing. It would be great if we could get the information out soon, like tomorrow, so that we could put it in Front Porch Forum a couple of times. You know, again, people don't always see Front Porch Forum, and if we only put it in once and they don't see that, they're not going to know about it. And if they don't have kids in the school, you know, it's just important, again, to let people know as much as we can, as many times as we can about what's happening. So the sooner we can get the boilerplate to put in our own town Facebook pages and to send out to the community, whatever's going to come from the district, that would be great. Yeah, do you do that, Krista, or is that something that Patrick does, or do you need help with that? How does?
I mean, I would love some help. That usually comes out of this committee, and then we ask board members to post, but I'd love to also ask this committee, you know, I can copy you on anything that's posted, and you are welcome and encouraged to share it also.
Okay, and I'm happy to help.
I
Okay.
am too.
Thank you.
Can I
Joan.
ask a question?
Yeah.
So, am I understanding that the school board is going to see the budget the very first time on the night that it adopts it? And then once it adopts it, it's set in stone? What's the purpose of this meeting that you're planning if it's not going to have any influence on the budget? And if the school board members have no influence on the budget, is what it sounds like. So I'm kind of puzzled about this whole process now, because I thought the school board listened to the community and was instrumental in conveying that to the superintendent for the budget. But it sounds like the superintendent designs the budget, shows it to the school board at the meeting that it gets voted on. Am I missing something here?
It's the last version of the budget, right? So it's not, we were introduced to it already, and that would be the final version. So it's not, I think it's a process, and at that point in the process.
And you've seen versions of it already?
So
Our
we
last
usually-
meeting, we were introduced to the budget. Yeah, and we made some pretty big decisions, I think, actually, about a lot of things that I hope will go out with this. So like adding money into a fund to help us deal with possibly needing a bridge after we've been in a position where we had COVID related money coming in. So we made a decision to hopefully set aside some money that would help bridge us from all of the extra funding we have now to when we're back to a regular budget. So we've definitely already been engaged in a part of creating.
So what is it you're asking the community to have input on here?
I think this is a chance to ask some questions to help understand what you're looking at, to get information about it. It's to help learn more about what's going on. So that's what we would hope, and we know that there are people that want to know what's going on. So it's an opportunity.
I think that's what we were saying at the beginning, Joan, is that given the timing, it's not likely that the board or the superintendent would be able to use any input we would collect next week. And so it isn't a forum, really. It's an informational meeting and an opportunity to ask questions. And I think that what we're trying to do as a committee is anticipate the kinds of questions that people will have on their minds, so that the presentation, the information that's presented will be, will reflect what we imagine people will want to know.
And people will not have seen the budget yet.
What they will see is a summary of the basics of the budget, but they won't see the detailed budget by any means. And they won't see, at least, this isn't what I would wish, but it's what I am anticipating. They won't see the budget broken out by school.
Right.
They
'cause
won't,
that's
they
not
won't
how we do
see,
it. Yep.
they won't see the budget broken out by superintendent's office. They won't see it that way at all.
But if I look at what was in the thought exchange, I mean, people are going to want to know if the thoughts they gave were taken into account.
Right.
People asked about outdoor time, they asked about the sort of administrative structure, the coaching, the busing, whatever they asked about. They're going to want to know if those thoughts were considered and used or considered and dismissed. I think that's what people are going to want to know, since a lot of people just spend a lot of time giving information about that. They're going to want to know how that was used or not used.
And
So if I could just
I really
jump
do
in.
think, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we have to remember that over the course of a whole year, it's our goal to get ongoing and regular input and to be connected to what is important to folks. And I think we hear that in a lot of different ways, so that when our administrators start to build the budget, they have a sense thematically of what the district or the community members' priorities are and what the board members' priorities are. And that's that kind of maybe 30 or 20,000 foot view of the budget building process. And in an ideal world, we would be regularly asking our community about what's important to them for lots of reasons related to the budget, but also related to lots of things. And this thought exchange, we talked about, should we do this or not at this moment in time, knowing that some of those themes had already been shared, and it was so late in the game of making very small detailed changes, it might not be able to make a major shift. And this group decided, you know what, it was still important to have a place for people to share what they're thinking about. And we've asked Patrick to do his best to articulate to us how well he can address that in the budget he's going to bring before us. He couldn't make a major sea change because it is too late, but I think the expectation is that he would show, and one thing I think Liz alluded to was that, they're advocating for adding $500,000 or $550,000 back into the budget for staffing, which I think is a direct response to needs we heard, not just in the thought exchange, but over the course of the year. So I think the line by line piece we get into when we're at the annual meeting and we share with the community, this is exactly what those themes, how they're playing out in the budget, we hope you'll vote on and approve. But the board's expectation is that those line items will reflect the themes that we asked to be a priority based on what we have heard and what we believe to be important. And I think we'll hear that, and I think it's to different levels of detail than that folks might want. And I think the board's trying to get more confident and comfortable with what level of detail we should have when. But I do believe that the thought exchange was still useful. And I think it's important for folks to understand that that we're listening and hearing, and here's how next year might look differently than this year based on some of that.
Even so though, Krista, I mean, Joan has a point about, let's take the coaching staffing as an example. Lots of people have had questions about that. And it may be true, and it seems to be true, that the budget does not reflect any cut in the coaching staffing. But since that issue is very budget related and has come up again and again, it probably would be helpful for the superintendent to explain his thinking about that, what decisions he made in the budget about that, and maybe there were decisions to keep it all in, and why. I mean, it may not be popular with the people who raised the issue, but it is something that people want to know that's directly related to the budget. And they did, that did come up quite a bit, I think, in the thought exchange. And there are other topics that would probably be easy to pull out like that.
Yeah, and I think one thing that speaks to that I've been interested in is, finding ways for our administration to more clearly articulate what their vision and plan is and what that looks like. And so I think this is one place where they can do that. And you're right, not everybody might agree with it, but it's important for all of us to understand that these investments are being made in this way, and here's why. And I think there's some confusion about.
People are going to be interested to know, what are the decisions that have been made in the budget that reflect an attempt to save money and keep our schools open? I mean, I know lots of people who want to know that. I want to know that. I mean, I guess in a way we're asking for the superintendent to be willing to speak to some pretty tough issues that are directly budget related.
If I could chime in real quick, I apologize because I've been unfortunately multitasking while we've been meeting a little bit earlier on, but so I apologize. I'm sure this was well discussed, but so Patrick's going to be at this forum at the heart of it, or no, Krista?
So the idea is that he would present. I'm
Right, like the
assuming
budget
he'll have other
presentation.
folks there like Floyd and Katrina and maybe Susan to address questions, but he will present like he did to the board. He would present the budget.
Okay, makes sense.
And then, yeah.
Because I mean, these were some of those, because what I would say, Nancy, is I think some of these questions were things that we had advanced ahead of the budget presentation. And I know that at least in the presentation on the 20th of December, Patrick's proposal of adding money back in, I mean, he's going to have to talk about what his plan is and his response to a lot of the concerns for the needs, of adding the personnel, right? And I mean, I think that's a really valid question that he probably should be prepared for to answer. I mean, it occurred to me all of a sudden, and it takes me a while sometimes to catch up, but when we have board meetings, board members get to ask questions all the time, and the public just gets to sit there and just wait in the beginning, and the end, which must be very difficult, especially if there are a lot of really relevant questions they have to ask. And maybe the benefit of the forum, it's kind of saying, hey, public, you don't have to just make a comment at the beginning and the end. You get to ask some of your deeper questions that you've been sitting on the sidelines, all this time, waiting to ask and actually have an answer question sort of scenario, just like board members get to do. So I mean, I don't know if that's a way of doing, but all of a sudden it just dawned on me, if I was a public member, it'd be like, oh great, I've had these questions, I finally get to ask them.
That's right. And yeah,
directly. Yeah, and I think, and that's really valuable, because I just want to make sure, just Dawn, I know you're out there too, that that Patrick's really prepared, because I agree, it could be some really tough questions, ones that though the superintendent should be ready for. So you know, and going back to what Joan said before and Liz had said is, again, I'm relearning how this process works. Our meeting in October in Moncton was the first meeting where Patrick and Floyd sort of put out there, this is what we're thinking sort of generally, not knowing equalized pupils and all the other factors that are in there. You know, what do people think if we increased it? Was it 3%? Was the first? Was it originally always 5, even in October?
Well, I think we asked for 5 at that meeting, but I can't remember what the original. I think
With the
Yeah,
There
you
was
asked
no-
for
yeah.
5 in October, and then at the December 20th meeting, you said, you asked the question, is 5 enough?
Yeah.
And the superintendent said, maybe not.
Right. Right. And that was just on December 20th. This was just our last meeting.
That's
And the
right.
question is, you know, does there need to be more? And so, you know, we have other meetings that are coming forward. So those are all very good questions as well that I imagine the public, you know, may ask as well. So it's an interesting process, John, of watching sort of how they've been moving and thinking, how do we, you know, shift with the numbers and how do we try to address some of the greater needs? But in terms of getting into the detail about what each school is, how the coaching model, I agree that there's less transparency, and, you know, hopefully Patrick will be able to explain, you know, I presume what he's going to say is, I have the same model. I still have the same, you know, level of supports. I'm actually adding personnel. We don't call them coaches, we call them other things. And what's really interesting to me is the connection between the budget and really more of the programmatic piece, right? You know, you have a system for how they're trying to implement these services. And it's really more about their effectiveness as opposed to the money. You know, like it's kind of, I mean, we're talking the money here for the budget. But really the superintendent has quite a lot of leeway on how he spends that money to achieve those goals. We don't really have that control. In the end, we just approve the number. And in the end, I mean, we help build it, but in the end, it's still a number. And when the citizens vote, it's still just a number, right? But as a board member, we have to try to encourage him to build that number for a particular purpose, right? So I don't know, I'm sorry. Again, like I can imagine as a citizen, I'm gonna have these same questions. I'm gonna be as confused. What's kind of scary is I'm confused and I'm on the board. And I've watched these presentations and, you know, again, I can only imagine that we as board members, but Patrick is just gonna have to do his best to try to explain, you know, I'm still funding it the same. I understand that people aren't happy. It's really more a matter of implementation. I mean, and that's my perspective, you know, it's not like these models can't work if he's really going to still stand by them. You know, so we'll see. And throwing more money isn't necessarily the fix for the coaching model. Does that make sense too? It's really more a matter of what is your plan and what do you need to fund it? I don't know. I could go on and on, Nancy, but thank you for answering me, Chris. I know I'm rambling here, but I have a little bit more clarity about what's going to be happening on the 12th, and really it'll be interesting, and hopefully Patrick will be ready, that there'll be a lot of questions being asked of him.
Well, it sounds like especially the board members who are here are going to be talking to Patrick as a result of this conversation about what they're hoping.
Mm-hmm.
I see Erin's hand up. Go ahead, Erin.
Yeah, thanks. I have kind of a process question, continuing to focus on the coaches as an example. Over the last year or two, I've heard pretty uniformly negative things about the coaches from teachers and community members, just from a whole lot of different directions. So using that as an example, it seems like if we have a situation where the superintendent is focused on and committed to one avenue, well, let's just say for the sake of argument that the community is very against the coaches and that they use a lot of money. People think could be spent in a better way. And just for the sake of argument, let's say that that's pretty universally disliked among the community members and the stakeholders. Is there a process for the community to communicate that to the board and for the board then to push back on that? Because it doesn't seem like that's necessarily happening. And I think that that is probably going to come up in this informational meeting. And it would be nice to have some kind of an answer for people with, what is the answer to that question? What is the power of the board? What is the power of the community in terms of specific elements, not just this broad number that Sandy was talking about? Because it's something that I think is really important to people, has been really important to people, but particularly with a lot of the issues that have been coming up this fall, I think people have very strong opinions about how the limited staffing numbers, budget that we have is allocated.
I mean, and I think the issue about coaching, if I can just say, when I was associate superintendent, if I could have had the money to hire coaches for everyone, including for myself and for the superintendent, I would have jumped at the chance. I believe in coaching. I think that everyone needs a coach, especially a good coach. And when I've had a good coach, it's helped me immensely. I think where it's tricky is if we're tight on money and we're thinking about closing schools, one has to ask, are there ways to save? Are there other ways to get what good coaches give without the staffing costs that it entails? I mean, I think that's where the rubber meets the road in the conversation. I mean, there certainly must be teachers who don't want to coach ever and think that they know everything there is to know about teaching, which no one does. But, if we had all the money in the world, coaching would be wonderful. And we'd also find ways to make time for it. But since we don't, I think that's one of the reasons coaching and some of the intervention models in the district have come into question, because there are other ways. There are other models. There are ways to teach people to coach, professionals to coach each other, those sorts of things, cross-training people around that. So, I mean, those are the questions that have come up for me about the coaching model. But I guess I just want to be clear. I think coaches are a great thing, and finding ways to support teachers in learning more about the craft is huge, and it's a huge need.
Yeah, and I don't want to get this community discussion sidetracked into yay or nay coaches. I just using that as an example, and I don't personally have a strong feeling because I don't know enough about it. But I am using that as an example for this really process question, which is if there's a strong community sentiment, and I'm just saying for the sake of argument, I don't know what the figures are. Let's just assume for the sake of argument that everybody in the community dislikes it, right? But that the administration for some reason is really committed to it. It could be coaching, could be a different issue. Is there a way for the community to weigh in on that and change the superintendent's mind via the board? Or is that just something that people don't have the power to do?
Well, I would say that I think the community proposals process is a really great example that I might use instead, which is where we really have been going through this process and pivoting to being open to lots of other possibilities besides the one that was that the board asked the superintendent to present to us. And so there is definitely an avenue for, I guess I personally think as a board member, it's our job when our leaders present a direction to learn how robust or how much fidelity there is in that direction. And that learning comes from their expert opinion. It comes from community's input. It comes from lots of different sources. And so I think that's our work, is like, to find ways in our process to evaluate the direction we're headed in, taking into account different input sources, and based on that, to know if we're going in the right direction. And the budget is one small example of that. But I think, we're trying to find ways as a board to work through those processes. And I personally think the way we've handled the proposals for configuration is a good example of that. Community voice is part of it, for sure. And we also hire a superintendent to offer there. And so for the coaching, for example, I was sort of saying earlier, it would be great for the board to get more educated and more clear on what that vision is of a particular model, and to educate our community about it, and to have different input points to know how successful it's going to be and what the measures are to gauge that success, so that we know that the investment we're making in it in our budget is the right one. And we're not there yet, but
Yeah,
I do
so,
think
I
we're
mean, I
getting
know
better
that-
at asking hard questions. Yeah, go ahead.
I think the community process of proposals is a great example, and I think it really shows that this board is very committed to trying to do the right thing for the community. I think another way to show it, and I know the time is really short, but if some of the responses to some of the community input through the online feedback could be specifically, if some of those things like the coaching is not being reflected in this budget or in the future. For instance, some people are saying, just again, to use coaching, we don't like coaches, we want the money spent elsewhere. And Patrick says, we're not going to incorporate that into this budget. It might be great to say, this is, why I don't believe that, but also we got this feedback from the community and this feedback from teachers, just to kind of show what the community outreach is and what the process of incorporating that feedback is, just so that people don't feel like there's a uniform sentiment that then is being ignored. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yep. And that goes with to the transparency piece as well.
I wonder if it would be, I think it would be really helpful for this group to, share with me in an email some of the key questions that they hope are addressed at the meeting on the 12th, because I do think, one of the reasons why I value this committee so much is it is a mix of board members and community members. So, the questions that are on your minds often mirror the questions of other people in the community, as much as you could represent the community. I mean, you can't represent everybody, but you can represent a slice of the community. So, so I think that's a really good start. And, I think that's helpful for Patrick as he's trying to decide what to present. And if it doesn't get addressed, I'm sure someone will ask about it during the meeting. Yeah, so that helps with the accountability. I can't tell, Joan, your hand is up, and I don't know if it's up from before or if it's newly up. So if I've been ignoring you, I'm sorry.
Sorry, no, I just didn't take it down. Thank you.
Yeah. Nancy? Oh, you're still muted.
I wonder, I so remember Nate Levinson talking about the idea that the most trusted people in a school district are the principals. And I do wonder whether there's a way for principals' voices to be part of this event. I imagine Patrick would like to protect them from having to do it, because I know they're very busy people too, but one of the doubts I think that people in the community have relates to how silent the principals have been in the process. And it's in part by design. It is definitely in part the result of policy governance as an approach. But it would be, I think, comforting to know that principals are very thoroughly knowledgeable about the budget, to know what questions they've talked about as an administrative team, where they've had where they've changed their minds, had differences of opinion. I mean, I don't know. We can't ask them to air all their baggage, but it would be great to hear their voices more, not just on next week, but beyond.
Yeah, I know I've appreciated seeing and hearing more from them in the past few months as well. I think I captured some of the key things that were mentioned as far as what people hope to hear more about. But I want to be mindful of time and get to our updates. So please, if there's other things you think would be
Can you
useful
run
to-
down what you captured?
Yeah, so, okay, we know what information we're going to share in advance. We're going to come up with a blurb to provide some context. I don't think that'll be by tomorrow, but probably Friday. And share that along with some key information in advance. And then and we'll invite people to submit questions if you can't attend to Dawn, making it clear that they're related to the budget. Okay, so then some of the things we're hoping will be covered, school level information.
Yep, especially class sizes.
Yes,
Grade
class
configurations by
classes
school.
and grades. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that was in what Patrick shared with the board on the 20th. So class size
Grade configuration.
and grades. Okay, and then demonstrate or share my language here is awkward, but something around Patrick demonstrating the amount of money being spent on coaching and PD support versus the money being spent on direct instruction or something along those lines. I think that sort of gets at some of what we were talking about with the coaching model. Also, is there a role for principals in this budget meeting? Could they share what their priorities were that they brought to Patrick? That's all I had.
The tax rate effects in dollars by assessment range.
I have more in my minutes as well.
Oh, you've got
Okay.
it. Okay.
I think I caught
Okay.
most of them.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I think it's a paragraph of just questions, all questions. So
Okay, so what I will do is share that back out with everybody, and then by Friday, ask that you send me anything else that you have to add. Okay. Anything else on this? And we're all clear. It's an information session with Q&A. And next year it'll be earlier and it'll be more of a gather input and forum, ideally before October. Okay. Also, just a quick thumbs. Do people think I should ask Avneet and Kristen to come to a meeting and talk a little more about how we could use that exchange? Okay, great. I like that idea because then someone else gets to talk to besides me. Okay, so we've got 15 minutes left, and I really appreciate all the feedback everyone shared tonight. So Nancy, do you want to provide an update on what you heard from the merger study committee meeting last night? And then anybody else who was there can feel free to add in.
Yeah, who else was there? Am I the only
I
one?
listened in.
Oh, right, you were there. I saw you.
Yeah.
Well, so the merger study committee is has an I think is on a very tricky path. I think it's a very tricky path, and the path is they haven't decided to recommend merger, but the way their facilitator is leading them to coming to a decision is by really almost pretending. I don't think they use the word pretend, but it's pretending that they have decided to recommend a merger of governance of the two big school districts. And so they are writing articles of agreement, which typically, so instead of really weighing the pros and cons and deciding whether or not to merge and then writing the articles of agreement, they're writing the articles of agreement as if they've decided, which it's hard not to editorialize, so I won't stop myself. It does seem to be a way that is designed to convince the committee to recommend merging. Anyway, last night they had warned on their agenda that they were going to start to talk about the question of whether to have an article of agreement that would say that an elementary school could not be closed without a vote of the town. And Dave Sharp introduced language for an article like that, and I guess they decided it was too early to. He even suggested it as a motion, but I guess they decided it was too early to try to come to a pretend decision about that, an article about school closure. But I guess as I listened to the conversation, the other thing that you should know is that the person who chaired, Mary Kate Kelly from Moncton, who was a great chair, began the meeting, or began this part of the discussion by talking about the letters they had received about this issue. And they had received a letter from the Lincoln Select Board. This is the Merger Study Committee. A letter from the Lincoln Select Board, a letter from the Starksboro Select Board, a letter from the Starksboro Planning Commission, and a number of letters from other community people, essentially in favor of an article around school closure that would prevent the closure of a school without a vote of the town. But as I heard the discussion of the people on the committee, it sounded like that it sounded like there wasn't much love for that article that Dave Sharp had suggested, and it sounded like they were moving toward a merger and a merger of governance, and that's really what was going to happen. Now, if that does happen, there'll be a vote of the two districts and and all of that, but it was discouraging. I guess that's my update. What did you think, Liz?
Well, I thought a lot. I'm really not. I'm processing that. I've been listening to every single one of the meetings. And really the thing that stood out most to me was one of the public comment people who I know very, very well, and I look forward to calling her shortly and making a plan to have a chat, one friend to another, one town to another. So I mean, I definitely understand the feeling of discouragement, but I have a feeling of excitement as well. So, I mean, I just like.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you said, Liz.
I'm also excited you know, and I think that I'm excited about it as well. And I think that even with you and I right now, this just shows how much work we have to do as a community to kind of find that middle ground still and find that shared values. And yeah, so I'm really processing that one day at a time. So much of my focus is on our 5 towns, and I haven't really, other than listening along, engaged very deeply with the idea of Virgins at this point. So
I guess what was most disappointing for me about it was that I think that if they had begun the conversation, not by talking about merging governance, but by really having an in-depth study of how they could collaborate, how the 2 districts could collaborate without merging governance, that would give the 2 districts more experience in working together and would be able, and the 2 districts could save money in doing that and also create some opportunities for kids that kids don't have right now, especially across the high schools and middle schools. And that would be, I just left wishing that they had begun that way, because it would have made it, I think the merging of governance so much can happen without doing that would save money and create opportunity.
Nancy, when I've only had the time to watch one meeting, and I did not see last night's meeting of the merger study committee. When you say merger of governance, is that just more of one superintendent's office, you know, administrating over 2 districts, whether or not there was really any change to the school themselves? Like, that's what you mean by governance versus this concept of what are those schools going to be? Like merger of high schools, you know, that kind of thing.
When I say merger of governance, I mean dissolving the 2 district boards and creating one Uber board that makes decisions for this about the schools in both in the Virgins area and the Bristol area. And those decisions, I mean, those decisions might involve closing schools. They certainly have talked quite seriously about merging the high school, like not merging 9 through 12 and putting it in either Virgins or Bristol, and merging the middle school and putting it in either Virgins or Bristol. But they're also talking about a board that might decide things like, let's take all the 6th graders in our elementary schools and make them part of a big middle school. I mean, so, but it would be, you know, it would be a further consolidation and moving the governance, the board, further from the actual schools that they're governing.
I promised my kids I would be home by 8. I'm
Oh,
at
you're at
central
the
office.
Sue's office. Oh, gosh, I'm sorry.
No. But this is a really important conversation. And so, and since I'm the chair, I get to have the last word. Is to say that I hope that similarly to how we have been working through our own district's configuration conversation, that this process will unfold similarly. In other words, maybe I'm, you know, blissfully ignorant, but I like to imagine that it would be really difficult for us to make something happen that our community, at least today, many members seem pretty skeptical about. I'd like to imagine that we would want to have lots of really important conversations and find ways to all be on the same page. I like to think that what we hear from Nate will really help put all of this into context. And so I think it's really important to be paying attention to what this committee is doing, but I think we also need to remember they're going to you know, our board can come out with statements of support or not support for that work. And I think our community's voice is a part of that. So I hope, yeah. I guess I don't think it's the runaway, quite the runaway train yet. I think we're, it's very important to be paying attention to. But there's a lot of information still that we need to gather.
I love it when you talk like that, Krista. I really do.
That's why it's bedtime, kids. Oh my gosh, I hope you appreciate that and that I'm not just shutting it down because it's so important. But I just, yeah, there's so much context and I think we'll get there.
Well, I
else?
hope you're right that it's not a runaway train. I hope you're right. I really do.
Yeah. I saw Joan yawn. So any last thoughts before we convene? Or
Well,
we
just keep us
adjourn?
posted on how we can help for next week. You
Yep.
know, calling us. If you have drafts of things you want us to look at or,
Okay,
okay.
all right. Well, if there's nothing else, then I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Rob will make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Rob. I'm not going to worry about a second and I'm not going to worry about us all voting. But I hope everyone has a good evening and please share your feedback with me on what else you want to hear from that meeting next week.
Thanks,
Have a good
everybody.
All right.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Krista.
everyone.
Thanks,
Have a great
everyone.
night.
All right, bye.